Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. My name is Dr. Keith McNally. This is the Question Guy podcast. I am going to get this right. This is Ann Debutte. Please tell me I got it close.
That was perfect, 100% there.
And I do appreciate that. Thank you so much. And you are all the way up in Canada, correct?
I am. I'm in a little place called Ottawa, which happens to be Canada's capital.
I've never been to Canada, and I am half a century old plus some years. I've been told that it's beautiful. I don't know where, but Canada is beautiful, I think, all over that I'm understanding. Am I understanding that correctly?
You certainly are. It is an amazing, beautiful, expansive continent country. It's big.
Well, I need to take the trip up there, and I don't know when, but hopefully within the next couple of years. But let's go ahead and get into this conversation because now I'm a bit excited and I'm concerned. And so this is going to touch on some really personal issues that you've experienced. And it started with the passing of your father, if I'm understanding correctly. So, can we touch on that? And let's really dive into your personal transformation story.
Certainly. Yes, I've got my dad to blame, and I blame him all the time for what I'm doing now. But going back, Dad was old. We knew it was coming. We just didn't know when. And like any of us, we don't sort of ready ourselves. We just continue and we just carry on. So when the day did arrive, it was a shock because it was a sudden death. I thought, being having nursed in Britain, that I'd be immune to whatever it was one was supposed to feel. I just had half the equation. I wasn't scared of death, had dealt with it on the wards as a nurse. What my nurse training hadn't prepared me for was the emotional component. And that took me out. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. I would go and seek help, but I was told everybody's grief is different. Okay, get that. But then the next part had me wondering, you never get over your grief.
Wait, who
So,
told you that? Did somebody tell you
the,
that?
yeah, that was a professional I sought to
Hmm.
help me understand what it was I was experiencing. Having nursed, I'd seen miracles. Well, death is supposed to be a normal part of life. It didn't make sense in my scientific background mind that you would never get over your grief. So that took me on a journey of exploration for the next umpteen years, and I'm still on that exploration.
So let's put this in perspective for those who are listening and watching. Um, so time, and I mean that by time frame. So how old was your dad? How old were you when this happened? When did this happen?
This happened in 2011.
Okay.
Dad was 88. I was just coming up for 59, you could say.
Okay.
We expect it. We just don't know when that end date is going to be. But
So was there ever talk? Was he sick or you said it was sudden, but
it was sudden, yeah. He had, a few minor things going on, but nothing that would alarm us.
okay.
And
So did
yeah,
it pass in the night? Was it during the day? Did he just
it was
drop?
during the day.
Wow.
I got a phone call from mum. I was just starting my day at the cancer center where I was working. And she said, "We think dad's had a heart attack." So immediately there and then, I'm thinking, all right, which hospital are you going to go to? Because we have a heart institute here in Ottawa. Or is he going to go to the local hospital, which was like 10 minutes from where they were? She couldn't answer that. So I decided, because I'm at a hospital clear across town, I'll wait by the phone.
Mm.
And the phone call arrived. I got directions as to where they were, and I set off. That is when I discovered that I probably shouldn't have been driving. The route that I took so many years, the entrance to the highway was closed, and I couldn't figure out where was the next, entry point to get onto this highway that I could take to their place. And I did figure it out, but looking back, I was going into shock. I recognize that now.
Typically, when we're in a state where there's a crisis, something has happened.
Yeah.
It's going to take us out of it will take us out of our norm, and it whether it's death, a loss of job, whatever, we're going to be in a state of flux,
Hmm.
and we appreciate that. But you said this was a start of a journey. So something was going on at this present moment in your life, and then things were going on continuously thereafter. What is that?
Absolutely. Well, being a Brit, I don't do emotions. I hadn't been
What?
trained to do emotions.
What
I
has
had
that got
to
to do with
learn.
emo? Most of us aren't. We, as a human being, as human beings on this earth, the last thing, which is becoming more and more prevalent, and I'm going to talk about this in this show, but also other shows that I have, is we need to step it up. We need to
We
step
do.
up our ability to communicate from emotions
Hmm.
with our emotions because we're emotional. Now, I'm not saying we have to be bad or rude or anything like that, but we have to experience them because if we don't, what
If you
happens?
don't, they will totally take you out. I
Mm.
consider myself to be a very organized person. The weeks after that event, I couldn't even begin to organize Christmas. He died in November. So we were coming up for the holidays. And I had quite a responsible job. I wasn't nursing, thank goodness, but I couldn't concentrate. I was scared. I knew I was going to make mistakes. I
Mm.
hadn't. It was just a question of when. So that's when I went to seek more help because I needed to not be working at this particular time. And I was fortunate enough. That alone brought in all the guilt because so many of my colleagues had lost a parent and they hadn't gone off on what we term sick leave here. And I'd be talking to one of my bosses. I worked for a surgical oncologist and a radiation oncologist. And the surgeon called me to see how I was doing. And when I was explaining what was going on, he said, "It sounds like you have a reactionary depression." And I went, "Oh, I didn't know there was such a thing." Just giving me that label. Now, I don't normally like labels, but that to me gave me a life raft. It was like something to hang on to because if there was a label, then other people had gone through what I was experiencing. I wasn't losing what I termed my mind. This was normal. I just hadn't been taught how to deal with it.
So this is the journey then, how to deal with it. Yes.
Yeah, this is my journey.
What was the first or next step after you grabbed onto that life raft, as you said?
I was able to work through what it was I was feeling. An amazing, well, one of my nursing friends at the hospital gave me a wonderful book by Carla McLaren, The Language of Emotions, What Your Feelings Are telling you.
Uh,
That would become my Bible.
We need to put that book in the description in our show notes.
Absolutely.
How? So what were you able to grab onto? What were you able to process and hold on to as truth to help you deal with your emotions?
It was how to deal with grief, how to allow, to give yourself permission. What else I read in her book was she was talking about these people from Africa that did rituals. Well, no idea what rituals were other than the funeral. It's just something, again, we're never taught rituals, are we? And one of theirs, which I thought was fascinating, they are a tribe in Africa, as I say. Whenever joy is no longer present in their village, everybody downs tools and they go off and do a grief ritual for 3 days. And I'm thinking, wow, wouldn't that be amazing if you have somebody to support you so you're not alone, you go through this and you bawl and cry, scream, kick, shout, whatever it is you need in this ritual, and you return back and you have access to your happiness and joy. And I thought that's what we need to have here. That's just one thing that I grabbed onto. It was learning about sadness, learning about anger, what they are there to sort of teach us. Um, I can go into a couple of them if you
Well,
want.
and we will. And so just a couple back steps because I'm thinking about that ritual component and the word permission, and I'm big on the word permission because I use it in my own talks. It typically requires somebody outside of ourselves to say, "This is safe. You can do this. I give permission." Meaning, in your space, let it out. It's safe. We're going to go wherever that space is, both mentally and physically. Kick, scream, yell, cry, let the emotions out. Way back in the day, I was taught, and I was a social worker when I got out of college, that if we don't express our emotions, they're going to come out anyway.
They will at the most inopportune moment. What do you think road rage is all about?
Yeah, right. Well, they're going to come, and he said they're going to come out sideways. They're going to come out in inappropriate, unhealthy drugs, alcohol, whatever, road rage, whatever that anger, whatever that fierce expression, because we keep it inside and it boils up. But you grabbed onto this book. You learn to understand emotion, its purpose. You learn to express it. Talk to us about the release of the expression of emotion. Can you do that?
I can.
Please.
What I would do, because by this time I had returned to work, and you just never know when you're going to feel the emotions balling up, and any minute they're coming. So I would either go to the washroom and I'd have a little chat with my emotions. Thank you. I see. I'm aware of you, but I can't deal with it right now. I'd be in and out of meetings. It just wasn't something I could readily sit there and bawl. But what I would say to them, I will deal with you when I get home. So what I would do after supper, I have a space where I would light a candle, have a picture of dad, and I would sit there and I would try and bring to mind what might have been the trigger for that. And it may be that anger comes up. So I would do, which is in Carla's book, conscious complaining. Oh, that is so good for the soul. So I would just express everything that I was upset about, having to be a responsible adult. I didn't want to be this responsible adult. Dad hadn't taught me how to be it. So that would be one ritual where and once you get over the anger, the tears aren't far behind. because the anger is there protecting the pain that
Mm,
you're in.
yeah.
So that was just one of the many ways. But all of this is in her book and it's brilliantly laid out.
Well, you took what was in that book and you made it personal. You made it yours. You took ownership of it. And so you started to heal.
Yeah.
But healing doesn't usually occur within days. It usually occurs within weeks, months, possibly years.
Yeah.
Earlier in the conversation, you said you're still kind of healing. Yes?
I'm
You're still
learning, I'm learning about grief
okay.
and trauma. I've added so many more onto the mix from those early days. I was very fortunate. I straddled both worlds. I had a background, a scientific background, but I was also fiercely into the holistic energy work. So I had a lot of friends that were able to do Reiki on me. They were able to do what they call treatments to sort of help me process, help my body process this. I would go, I think about a year later, I went on a retreat to somebody that I had been working with. And she said, I'm sensing there's still some grief. Let's tap into it. So she gave me a huge box of art supplies, crayons, you name it, everything was there. She put the gas fire on, a big, beautiful gas fire, and she put music on. And I was just to sort of be in this space, and she disappeared. Well, I started to sort of just kind of get into the flow. And then I listened to the music, and it had changed, and it was playing jazz music. Well, my dad was a musician. All I've learned about music came from him. He was a he was a drummer in the big bands in the day. And jazz was something that was readily available. So you can imagine that triggered. So there I am, coloring or whatever it was. And I suddenly thought, oh, good Lord, my dad was an artist. And here's me, attempting to do art. Well, I bawled and bawled and bawled and bawled and bawled. Anyway, a few hours later, my body, I felt I needed to move. So I did. And behind her house is this beautiful ravine. And I walked around it. And coming back, you had to go over this bridge. And as I'm coming back, there's a pond full of geese. And all of a sudden, they start making all this ruckus. So I'm standing there and I see the bridge and I thought, I'm going to cross this bridge and I'm going back to my life. I'm going to put this grief down. And I sort of did so in my mind. And as I did so, this flock of geese flew over my head. And I went, no, better still, take it with, take it with me. So that in itself was very symbolic to me. I did not recognize it when I booked this retreat. That was year one after Dad's death.
Hmm.
My subconscious, my soul knew what it was doing, but I hadn't kind of cottoned on until I was sitting talking to my friend. So that was sort of a year of how I kind of dipped in and out of my grief.
So he passed, you said what, 2011? Yeah.
Sorry?
He passed when in 2011, yes.
Yeah.
And now it's 2023.
Yeah.
Been some time. How are you?
I am amazing. I can talk about my dad. I don't feel that initial pain. I would say I've healed my heart. I've filled it with memories, fun memories. Yes, I'll still get sad, but sadness is an emotion. We're always going to have all our emotions, regardless of how much grief, but I'm not in that grief state. I can think. I couldn't think. I had what they term grief brain in those early
Mhm.
days. No wonder I couldn't organize anything.
Yeah. So does that mean, are you better at expressing emotion, or do you have control over your emotional state? Is it, or is that a wrong question to ask?
I would say I am more in touch with my emotions and my feelings.
Yeah.
That's what all this taught me. Because I think as a nurse, you tend to put a wall. You have to. It's like a protection
Yeah.
mechanism. And I'm sure as a social worker, you potentially had a sort of a,
You
you
walk
don't,
in as a professional and you leave your
that's right.
emotions behind. And then
Yeah.
when you don't balance the two, you clock out at 5 o'clock or whenever, and you go home, and then all that you experienced in the day is now weighted upon you because you don't have a way to express or release or make any understanding of what you experienced, because it's not just your mind experiencing, your whole body experiences the day. Your
Yeah.
cells experience it, your gut experiences it, your head experiences, your emotions experience it. And you know this. So so what is your, like, do you have a, I don't want to use the word ritual, but do you have a routine, maybe daily, regularly, that allows you to simply express your emotions because they're there?
If they're there, I've got some amazing yoga. I've become a grief movement yoga guide.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
Never.
No, well, it's a thing.
Grief movement. Talk
I'm
to
a
me.
grief movement
So like
guide.
I said, well, what is it? Because I don't even know what it is.
Well, because I'm not a yoga teacher, it is doing movement. They're yoga movements, but you can do them from a chair. But there's one particular one that I have learned just by being a yoga student, where you kind of express and you chop your emotions out of you.
Wow. And does it work?
Oh, yes. My husband can hear me and he goes, "Oh, good, she'll come back and she'll be lovely. She'll be on an even keel."
So let me ask you this, with the time that we have remaining, because I would love to come back and bring you back on Coach's Corner to talk about how you help other people. But today is about your story. What is your relationship with your dad like now that he's passed? Because we still have that relationship.
And I have a picture of him outside of my office. And if I've had a particularly difficult day or a long day at the other side, I will go out and I'll talk to him and I'll tell him off. I'm also very grateful. It's all your fault, Dad.
Well,
And
you've
that,
mentioned that a couple of times now. That's something. I'm not a psychologist or counselor at all, but you tend to blame your dad for things that aren't quite
I
as.
know. This
So I
is
don't. Go ahead.
I use humor a lot.
Okay.
And I know he would appreciate it. And if we had more time, I would tell you an amazing humorous story that happened just before his funeral. But we could go on to that another time. From all of that, the following year, I would decide after 32 years that I hated my job, didn't want anything else to do with it. I left, retired, and 4 days later, the Grief Coach Academy found me and
Wow.
I reinvented myself. When you go through grief, what I discovered was there's growth. You grow in ways that you could never imagined. Who would have thought that not very good at math But 10 years later, you could say, I'd be a podcast host. I would have written a book. Now, I couldn't have had a crystal ball back then to say this is how my life has gone. But if that hadn't have all happened to me and I hadn't have had that experience, then I wouldn't be where I and what I'm doing today. So that's the transformation.
And that's a perfect way to end the conversation. But before we do, and for those who are watching, listening, please give the audience a word of hope, help, encouragement, who may be going through loss right now.
Yeah. Don't go through it alone. Grief can be an isolating moment for anybody, but there's also a strange thing that happens. You're isolating because you feel embarrassed about showing your emotions in public. And you're also thinking, well, if my friends or family loved me, they'd be here, they'd be contacting. So you isolate even more. Don't let that be you. There are your family and friends don't want to bother you. So they're giving you space. And sometimes, sadly, it's up to the griever to say, I really need you just to come and listen to me,
Yeah.
which I realize when you're grieving, that isn't something, but it's better than sitting there thinking that nobody loves you and you're even more lonely in all of this loss. Allow yourself to feel all the emotions. Don't be scared of them. Journaling is an amazing tool if that is something you can do, or even art therapy is brilliant for helping you express your emotions. What I like about journaling is you can look back and you can see that it's an up and down journey. It's like 2 steps forward, 10 back, and you think, I'm never going to get out of this. But you will and you are. And that's a way of sort of measuring how you're doing. So support sitting with your emotions and know that the sun is always shining above the clouds and hope is always there and it will bring you through it. It's trust, having faith in yourself, giving yourself permission, as you said, Keith. It's so, so important.
And thank you for this very blessed conversation. Thank you for joining me on the Question Guy podcast. And for the rest of you who are watching and listening, thank you too. And I'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks so much, Keith.